Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker. A time of plagues, potions, and painful remedies. We're diving into what life was really like for a doctor during the Middle Ages. Forget the heroic physicians and miracle cures that stories might have sold you. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day being a medieval doctor during a plague outbreak, and I'll explain why today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're hearing this from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to me seeing who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1347. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? You're a doctor in a town where whispers of a strange illness are beginning to spread. There's no medical school as you'd recognize it today, no antibiotics, no understanding of germs. Your training came from apprenticing with an older physician, reading ancient texts by candlelight, and learning through observation. Often incorrect observation. Your bed is a simple wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress that rustles with every movement. Not memory foam. Not even springs. Just dried plants that occasionally house small creatures you'd rather not think about. The morning air is cool against your face as you rise before the sun. No alarm clock woke you. Just the habit of years rising at this hour. The rooster calls in the distance as you shuffle across the cold floor. No carpet, no heated tiles, just worn wooden planks that creak under your weight. Your joints ache slightly. You're only 40 years old, but in this time, that's already considered somewhat elderly. Many of your patients don't make it past 30. You dress in the dim, light filtering through oiled parchment that serves as your window. No glass, no screens, just treated animal skin that lets in a murky glow. Your clothes are simple wool and linen, scratchy against your skin, never truly clean by modern standards. The smell of yesterday's herbs and medicines clings to the fabric, wormwood, sage, rosemary. The scents overlap and blend into your personal aroma. You don't notice it anymore, but your patients do. Your morning meal is simple. A piece of dark bread, perhaps some cheese if you're fortunate, maybe an apple stored from last autumn, slightly wrinkled but still edible. No coffee to wake you, no orange juice with added vitamins, just small beer. Weak alcohol that's safer to drink than the town's water. The beer is room temperature, slightly sour, but familiar and comforting in its way. You gather your medical tools into a leather satchel worn smooth by years of use. No stethoscope, no blood pressure cuff, no MRI machine awaits your patients. Instead, you pack glass vials of herbal remedies, a set of brass scales for measuring powders, perhaps a knife for bloodletting, and various dried plants tied in small bundles. Your medical reference isn't the physician's desk reference or WebMD. It's a handwritten journal passed down from your teacher, supplemented by your own observations, many of which are based on theories about humors and celestial influences that bear no relation to actual human physiology. As you step outside, the town is beginning to stir. Narrow streets wind between timber and plaster buildings leaning toward each other like old men in conversation. No pavement, no sidewalks, just packed earth that turns to mud when it rains. The smell hits you immediately. Human waste, animal dung, rotting food, all mingling in the morning air. There are no sewers, no garbage collection, just open gutters running down the center of streets where everything is tossed. You don't notice the smell much anymore. It's just how the world is. Your first patient lives near the edge of town, a laborer with a persistent cough. You walk because there's no other option. No cars, no buses, not even a bicycle. Just your 2 feet carrying you through streets that narrow to alleys barely wide enough for a cart. Dogs and chickens scatter as you pass, neither pets nor quite wild. They exist in the margins of human society, much like the beggars who occasionally reach out as you pass. Some of those beggars show signs of leprosy. Others bear the pockmarked faces of smallpox survivors. The laborer's home is a single room shared with his wife and 3 children. No privacy, no separate bedrooms, just a space where all of life happens. The air inside is thick with smoke from the small fire used for cooking and heating. No ventilation system. No hood over the fireplace, just a hole in the roof that sometimes works to draw the smoke upward. More often, it fills the room with a haze that makes everyone's eyes water and contributes to the very cough you've come to treat. You examine the man as he sits on a 3-legged stool. No examination table, no privacy curtain, no latex gloves. You press your ear to his chest to listen to his breathing, feeling the dampness of his shirt against your cheek. You ask him to cough while you observe the color of his face. His wife hovers nearby, worried. They've already lost 2 children to winter illnesses. They can't afford to lose him, too. Based on your training, you determine the man has an excess of phlegm, one of the 4 bodily humors that you believe must be kept in balance. No lung x-ray, no sputum culture, no antibiotics. Your prescription is a tea made from horehound and honey to drink 3 times daily, and perhaps some bloodletting to restore balance to his system. You take out your blade and a small bowl. The man rolls up his sleeve without question. This is normal medicine to him. You choose a vein at the elbow and make a precise cut, not too deep, but enough to let the bad blood flow. The dark liquid pools in the bowl, about a teacup's worth before you decide it's enough. You apply a cloth soaked in vinegar to stop the bleeding. The man is already pale, already undernourished. The last thing his body needs is to lose blood, but neither of you knows this. You genuinely believe you're helping. You wrap a bandage around his arm and accept your payment. A few small coins, perhaps a chicken, or promises to repair the roof of your home when he's feeling better. No insurance, no credit cards, no standardized pricing. Medicine is a trade like any other. As you walk to your next patient, whispers reach your ears. A traveler has arrived from a port city to the south, deathly ill with strange black swellings under his arms and in his neck. Something cold settles in your stomach. You've heard stories from distant cities, rumors of a great mortality sweeping across trading routes. You've read ancient texts describing similar symptoms, but nothing in your experience has prepared you for what might be coming. By midday, you've seen 4 more patients. A child with a fever who you treated with willow bark tea, not knowing you're giving a primitive form of aspirin. A woman with joint pain who received a poultice of mustard seed, the heat providing temporary relief. An elderly man with constipation who received a concoction of herbs with laxative properties. For a young woman with mysterious fainting spells, you recommended smelling salts and suggested her father find her a husband soon, believing her condition related to her womb growing restless. A common diagnosis for almost any female ailment. You stop at home to eat another simple meal. No refrigerator kept your food cold. No preservatives keep it from spoiling. You eat what's available and what won't kill you, which isn't always the same thing. Your knowledge of nutrition is based largely on folk wisdom and superstition. You believe in avoiding certain food combinations, not because of allergies or interactions, but because they might create imbalances in the body's humors. As afternoon fades toward evening, a messenger arrives at your door. The traveler from the port city has died, and the family he was staying with is now showing similar symptoms. The town officials request your presence, not because they expect you can cure this disease, but because someone must try. Someone must offer comfort and explanation in the face of approaching doom. You reach for your most distinctive tool, a beaked mask filled with dried herbs and spices. No N95 respirator, no understanding of airborne pathogens, just a leather hood, with glass eyepieces and a long beak stuffed with lavender, mint, rose petals, and other strong-smelling substances. You believe these scents will protect you from miasmas, the bad air that carries disease. The mask doesn't work the way you think it does, but the covering does provide some barrier against fleas that might carry the actual infection. A connection you'll never make in your lifetime. You put on a long, waxed coat that reaches to your ankles, thick gloves, and carry a rod about 4 feet long. The outfit serves practical purposes, keeping the bodies of the sick at a distance, creating a barrier between their humors and yours. But it also creates a terrifying figure that causes children to flee and adults to cross themselves as you pass. You look like death itself coming down the street. Ironic, since you're trying to prevent death, not herald it. The house of the infected family is already marked with a large X on the door. No hazmat team, no CDC, no isolation wards. The only containment method available is to keep the sick in their homes, sometimes nailing the doors, shut from the outside if the occupants try to escape their quarantine. Inside, you find the mother and 2 children already showing the telltale black swellings, buboes, that give this plague its name. The father stands pale and trembling. No symptoms yet, just fear as he watches his family suffer. You can do nothing to save them. Nothing. This is the harshest reality of being a medieval doctor. Your herbs, your bloodletting, your prayers and incantations, none of it affects the Yersinia pestis bacteria multiplying in their bodies. But you don't know this. You believe perhaps their humors became imbalanced, or they sinned against God, or the alignment of the stars has turned against them. You recommend a poultice of butter, onion, and garlic to draw out the poison from the buboes, an excruciating treatment that does nothing but add to their suffering. For fever, you suggest cooling them with damp cloths, one of the few treatments. That might actually provide some comfort. You might recommend the father burn aromatic woods in the fireplace, juniper, pine, cedar, believing the smoke will cleanse the air. It won't stop the disease, but the ritual gives him something to do besides watch his family die. You leave medicines, tinctures, and powders that cost the family most of their savings. They're desperate, enough to try anything, to believe anyone who offers hope. You are not intentionally cruel or greedy. You truly believe in your remedies. Your ignorance is not a moral failing, but a product of your time, of the limits of human knowledge in this century. As you leave, you hear the mother begin to cough up blood, a sign the plague has moved to her lungs. The pneumonic form, even more deadly, even more contagious. You walk faster, your long coat swishing around your ankles, your mask filtering your rapid breathing through layers of dried flowers that can't protect you from what's coming. Night falls as you return home. No electric lights illuminate your path, just the occasional oil lamp hanging from a building, and the partial moon overhead. The streets are quieter now. Those with homes have retreated to them. Those without find whatever shelter they can in doorways and church porches. You pass the town's central square where public announcements are made. Already there's talk of limiting travel, of turning away strangers. Too late measures that won't stop what's already arrived. In your home, you light a candle. Just one to save expense. No light switch, no reading lamp, just a flickering flame that casts huge shadows as you move about the room. You write in your medical journal, recording the symptoms you observed today, adding them to the collective medical knowledge that is more often wrong than right. Your quill scratches across the parchment. No ballpoint pen, no laptop, just a feather you trimmed yourself dipped repeatedly in ink you might have made from oak galls. Before sleeping, you wash your hands in a basin of water. one of the few truly helpful medical practices you observe, though you do it for ritual cleanliness rather than germ theory. No running water, no antibacterial soap, just a pitcher and bowl that you'll empty out the window when done. The same window where you might also empty your chamber pot, contributing to the cycle of disease that surrounds you. You lie in bed and listen to the night sounds of the medieval town. No traffic noise, no air conditioners humming, just the occasional shout, a dog barking, the town watch calling the hour. You fall asleep wondering if tomorrow will bring more cases of the strange disease, not knowing you're at the beginning of what will be called the Black Death, a pandemic that will kill between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population over the next 5 years. Morning comes again. Too soon. Your body aches from yesterday's walking, from sleeping on straw, from the constant strain of living in the 14th century. But patience await. More today than yesterday. The whispers of plague have become shouts of terror. 3 more houses bear the X that marks infection. Church bells toll for the dead and will barely stop ringing in the months to come. You dress again in your protective garments, not knowing they offer minimal protection. Your beaked mask, with its dried herbs, your waxed coat, your leather gloves, no face shield, no proper sterilization, no understanding of how useless these precautions are against fleas and bacteria. But they make you feel safer. They give you courage to enter the homes of the dying. The town council meets in the morning square, their faces grim beneath the brightening sky. No conference calls, no Zoom meetings, no statistical models to predict infection rates. Just frightened men making decisions based on superstition, limited information, and political necessity. They look to you for answers you don't have. Some blame the alignment of planets. Others suggest it's punishment from God. Still others blame marginalized groups, Jews, travelers, the poor. No understanding of bacteria, of fleas and rats as vectors, of global trade routes spreading more than just spices and silks. You listen to theories as incorrect as your own, nodding because you have nothing better to offer. The council decides on actions that range from ineffective to harmful. Processions of flagellants will be welcomed. Religious zealots who whip themselves through the streets, believing their penance might appease divine wrath. Large public prayers will be organized, bringing the healthy into close contact with the infected. The town's small Jewish quarter will be watched with suspicion. Old prejudices finding new fuel in fear. None of this will help. Some will actively spread the disease faster. You suggest what you believe might work. Burning herbs in public spaces, limiting the consumption of certain foods that might inflame the humors, perhaps killing stray dogs and cats that could carry miasmas. You don't realize you're recommending the elimination of the very animals that hunt the rats carrying plague-infected fleas. Again, your best advice makes things worse. As the days pass, your routine takes on a grim pattern. Wake before dawn, dress in your plague doctor outfit, visit homes marked with X's, offer useless remedies, watch people die, record symptoms, repeat. No weekends off, no vacation days, no retirement plan. Just service until you succumb yourself or somehow survive the pandemic. The methods you employ would horrify modern medical practitioners. For the buboes that characterize bubonic plague, you might lance the swollen lymph nodes, releasing pus and blood, sometimes applying heated cups to draw out more of the poison. No anesthesia beyond perhaps strong wine or opium for the wealthy. No sterile tools, no antibiotics to address the actual infection. The patients scream as you cut into the tender, swollen tissues, but you believe it's necessary, that suffering now might prevent death later. You're wrong. For patients coughing blood, indicating pneumonic plague, you recommend herbal steams, lying near fires to cook out the disease, drinking vinegar to make the body inhospitable to illness. None of it works. The pneumonic cases die the fastest, often within 24 hours of showing symptoms, and spread the disease through airborne droplets as they cough their lungs out into the enclosed spaces of medieval homes. When patients develop the black patches on their skin that indicate septicemic plague, you have no explanation, no understanding of bacteria in the bloodstream, of disseminated intravascular coagulation causing visible necrosis. You might suggest that evil has taken physical form in the body, that sin manifests as darkness in the flesh. Your treatments involve prayers as much as medicines, because you've reached the limit of your knowledge and can only appeal to higher powers. Some wealthier patients request bloodletting as a preventative measure, believing that removing some blood before illness strikes might keep them safe. You oblige, taking coins from the rich to help support your care for the poor. The balance of humors seems logical to you. If disease represents excess or corruption in the body's fluids, then removing some should help. The weakness that follows blood loss is interpreted as a sign the treatment is working, rather than the body struggling to compensate for lost volume. Your medical bag grows lighter as your supplies dwindle. No Amazon delivery. No pharmacy to refill prescriptions. Just whatever herbs you can gather yourself or purchase from increasingly expensive sources. Supply chains break down as surrounding towns close their gates, as merchants die or flee, as farms are left untended when entire families perish. Medicine becomes triage, deciding who might benefit from your limited resources, who is too far gone to help. The plague reveals the sharp divides in medieval society. The wealthy flee to country estates, isolated from population centers where disease spreads rapidly. The poor remain, crowded together, sharing walls and water sources, unable to escape. Religious orders that run hospitals face impossible choices. Some abandon their posts in fear. Others stay and die alongside their patients. Martyrs to both faith and ignorance. You notice patterns but misinterpret them. You observe that grain handlers and millers seem to die in greater numbers, correctly noting the connection, but wrongly assuming it's related to the grains themselves rather than the rats attracted to stored food. You see entire families perish while their neighbors remain healthy, unable to understand the random nature of which fleas bite which humans. You notice that the very old and very young die most readily, correctly identifying vulnerable populations but unable to strengthen their immune systems or protect them effectively. As weeks become months, the plague doesn't burn itself out as previous outbreaks of other diseases have done. No herd immunity develops, no seasonal decline as winter approaches. The Black Death seems almost supernatural in its persistence, in its ability to find new victims despite the growing emptiness of your town. Houses stand abandoned, workshops silent, fields unharvested. No census tracks the deaths. No statistics compile the losses, but you estimate half the population is gone, and still people sicken, still they die. Your own health begins to suffer, not necessarily from plague, but from exhaustion. Poor nutrition, the psychological weight of constant death. No mental health days, no therapist to help process your trauma, no recognition of concepts like burnout or PTSD. Just the expectation that you will continue, that your calling demands sacrifice, that God watches and judges your dedication. Some doctors in other towns have fled, abandoned their posts, for safer territories. You've considered it, in the dark hours of night when no one can see your doubt. But where would you go? Reports from travelers suggest nowhere is safe, that the plague follows trade routes and pilgrim paths across the continent. Perhaps there's refuge in complete isolation, in becoming a hermit far from human contact. But your training and obligation keep you in the town where people know your name and knock on your door with desperate hope in their eyes. Your medical knowledge evolves through bitter experience. You begin to reject some of the ancient texts that guided your early practice. Noticing that Galen's recommendations for plague seem useless, that Avicenna's compounds bring no relief. No peer-reviewed journals exist to share these observations. No conferences where doctors might compare notes. Just your own records and the occasional letter from a colleague in another town, if the messenger carrying it hasn't died along the way. You develop your own theories. Still wrong, but perhaps less wrong than before. You note that families who draw water from certain wells seem to fall ill in clusters, correctly identifying a pattern but attributing it to astrological influences on the water rather than rats contaminating the supply. You observe that people who handle the dead often soon join them, recognizing the contagious nature but blaming it on miasmas or spiritual corruption rather than direct transmission of bacteria. The Church offers explanations you're not equipped to question: divine punishment, demonic influence, tests of faith. As both doctor and member of a deeply religious society, you incorporate these beliefs into your understanding of disease. No separation of science and spirituality. No incompatibility between religious explanation and medical treatment. You recommend confession alongside cataplasms, prayer with poultices, spiritual cleansing alongside physical purges. Your plague doctor mask becomes a part of you, the smell of its herbal stuffing a constant presence, the limited vision through its glass eyes changing how you see the world, literally and figuratively. No face recognition software would identify you now. Your own mother might not know. You in this outfit. Children have nightmares about your beaked silhouette. Adults cross themselves when you approach. You've become a harbinger of death rather than a healer. The association between your arrival and a family's demise too strong to ignore. Your hands crack and bleed from constant washing in harsh lye soap and strong alcohols. No moisturizer, no rubber gloves, no hand sanitizer. You believe the washing protects you, and it might to some degree, but nothing can fully shield you from the constant exposure you face. Every patient interaction is a roll of the dice. Every house entered a potential death sentence. Yet you continue, day after day, because what else would you do? Who else would you be? Summer heat makes everything worse. No air conditioning, no refrigeration, no preservation methods beyond smoking, drying, and salting. Bodies decompose quickly. The smell of death hangs over the town like a physical cloud. You recommend burial within hours of death, contrary to traditional practices of laying out the dead for days of viewing and prayer. No morticians, no embalming. Just graves dug deeper and faster than ever before. Sometimes mass burials when too many die at once for individual ceremonies. Autumn brings no relief. Winter offers false hope as the rate of new cases slows slightly, only to surge again with spring. No seasonal vaccine, no understanding of why the cycles occur, just the relentless progression of a disease that seems determined to empty Europe of human life. One town, one family, one person at a time. Your medical practice changes permanently. You become more fatalistic, less confident in traditional remedies, more willing to try unusual approaches suggested by desperate patients or elderly healers on the fringes of accepted medicine. No clinical trials, no peer review, no malpractice insurance. Just the freedom and burden of making decisions without guidance, of experimenting on the dying who have nothing to lose. Some of your adaptations accidentally move medicine forward. You begin insisting on cleaner conditions for the sick. believing that filth attracts miasmas rather than understanding germ theory, but achieving somewhat better outcomes through improved hygiene. You start isolating the infected in designated houses away from the healthy, not understanding contagion vectors but stumbling onto effective quarantine. You notice that plague doctors who keep their hands clean and tools boiled seem to survive longer, establishing practices that will eventually become standard centuries, later for reasons you don't comprehend. Years pass before the plague begins to truly recede. No vaccine brings it to a sudden end. No public health campaign eliminates it completely. It simply burns through the available population, killing those most susceptible, sparing others through random chance or perhaps genetic resistance. You have no way to identify. The survivors rebuild with a changed relationship to death, to religion, to medicine itself. You survive, somehow. No Medal of Honor awaits. No recognition of your service beyond the quiet gratitude of those you managed to help and the bitter memory of those you couldn't save. Your medical practice continues in a town with fewer patients, with collective trauma that manifests in ways you don't have names for, with economic systems forever altered by the massive population loss. Your experience during the Black Death changes how you approach all medicine afterward. You trust observation more than ancient texts, practical results more than theoretical frameworks. No paradigm shift to modern scientific medicine, but perhaps a small step toward it. You train apprentices differently than you were trained, emphasizing what seemed to work during the plague years rather than what Galen wrote centuries before. The medical profession inches forward, dragged by disaster toward improvement. The plague returns periodically throughout your lifetime, never again with the same devastating intensity, but enough to revive the fear, to send you back into your beaked mask and waxed coat. No eradication, no herd immunity, just a disease that becomes endemic rather than epidemic, that joins the pantheon of illnesses medieval people expect might kill them at any moment. You grow old in a world permanently changed by plague, by the experience of watching society nearly collapse, of seeing medicine fail repeatedly in its most important test. No retirement community awaits, no pension plan, just working until you can't, until a younger doctor with steadier hands takes most of your patients, until your own health fails from decades of poor nutrition, constant exposure to disease, and the physical toll of medieval life. Your medical legacy exists only in the journal you kept, in the apprentices you trained, in the small modifications to treatment that seemed to help during the plague years. No peer-reviewed publications, no research hospitals named after you, no awards for lifetime achievement. Just the quiet continuation of knowledge, sometimes correct, often wrong, passed from one generation of healers to the next. And when you die, perhaps from the next outbreak of plague, perhaps from any of the countless other illnesses that claim medieval lives, your medical tools are passed to your apprentice. No estate sale, no donation to a medical museum, just the practical reuse of valuable implements. Your plague doctor mask with its long beak and glass eyes, your scales and knives and herb containers, all continue in service after you're gone. The role of doctor continues. The fight against disease never ends. The slow, painfully slow evolution of medical knowledge inches forward through centuries of trial and error. The true horror of being a medieval plague doctor isn't the constant exposure to death, though that's terrible enough. It's not the inadequate tools or limited knowledge, though these guarantee failure in your most important tasks. The true horror is that you never know how wrong you are, that your best efforts often make things worse, that centuries will pass before humans truly understand what you're fighting and how to stop it. You die believing in humors and miasmas, and astrological influences, methods and conceptual frameworks that seem obvious and logical to you, that future generations will discard as dangerous nonsense. You live and die in a world where the greatest medical minds cannot save a child from diphtheria, where pregnancy is a near-death experience, where a small cut might bring fatal infection. No antibiotics, no antivirals, no vaccines or ventilators or bypass machines. Just you and your limited tools against the vast, unseen world of bacteria and viruses you don't know exist. You fight blindfolded, hands tied against enemies you cannot name. And yet, you continue, day after day, patient after patient. Because someone must try. Someone must offer comfort even when cure is impossible. Someone must stand between the vulnerable and the diseases that hunt them, even if that stand is ultimately futile. Perhaps that's the one thing that connects you across the centuries to the doctors who will eventually conquer the plagues you fought in vain. The willingness to try, to learn, to serve, even when the odds are impossible, even when failure is guaranteed, even when death waits as much for you as for your patients. The candle burns low beside your bed as another day ends, as another day of being a medieval doctor during plague times comes to its close. No electricity, no light pollution brightening the sky, just darkness settling over a world that seems determined to empty itself of human life. And your stubborn, hopeless, necessary determination to prevent that from happening, one patient at a time, for as long as you can, for as long as you live. Sleep now, knowing that centuries later, others will look back at your struggle with a mixture of horror and gratitude. Horror at the conditions, at the limited tools, at the incorrect theories that guided your hand. Gratitude that you tried anyway, that you didn't surrender to hopelessness, that you kept the flame of healing alive, however dim, however flickering, until others could take it up and carry it forward into a future you'll never see, with medical miracles you couldn't imagine, with knowledge that would seem like sorcery to your medieval mind. Sleep. And perhaps dream of a world where doctors understand disease, where plagues can be prevented before they begin, where suffering can be eased with more than prayers and herbs. That world exists now, built on the foundation of your failure, your persistence, your unwillingness to surrender to the darkness of ignorance and disease. But there is still more to your story, more to understand about your daily struggle as a medieval doctor during plague times. The morning comes again, as it always does, indifferent to human suffering, to the names of those who didn't survive the night. Your routine begins anew. No weekend break, no vacation days, no separation between your profession and your identity. You are a doctor in plague times. Nothing more, nothing less. Your medicines require constant preparation. No pharmaceutical companies mass-produce your remedies. No quality control ensures consistent potency or purity. Just you. In the early hours, grinding dried herbs with a mortar and pestle worn smooth from years of use. The repetitive motion has formed calluses on your palms that never fully heal. Thyme, sage, rosemary, wormwood, each with its distinct scent that clings to your clothing and skin. You've forgotten what it's like to smell anything else. You combine herbs according to recipes passed down through generations of healers. No standardized measurements, no precise scales, just pinches and handfuls guided by experience and intuition. You prepare tinctures by soaking herbs in alcohol distilled from whatever fermented grain is available, letting them steep for days or weeks in glass bottles stoppered with wax and cloth. No rubber seals, no factory sterilization, just containers that are clean by medieval standards, which is to say, not very clean at all. For external applications, you make poultices and salves by combining crushed herbs with animal fats, usually tallow rendered from sheep or beef. sometimes beeswax when available. No petroleum jelly, no hypoallergenic bases, just whatever binding agent preserves the herbs and allows them to be applied to skin. The mixtures spoil quickly in summer heat, requiring constant replacement, constant work that fills the hours between patient visits. Your remedies for plague specifically draw on both ancient texts and folk wisdom that has evolved since the outbreak began. For the characteristic buboes, you prepare drawing salves with ingredients that would horrify modern medical practitioners. Dried toads ground to powder, spider webs collected from corners, occasionally human or animal excrement believed to pull out poisons through sympathetic magic. No evidence-based medicine, no clinical trials, just desperate attempts to use whatever might work based on symbolic associations rather than biochemical reality. The preparation of these remedies is itself physically taxing. No electric mixers, no pre-ground ingredients, just hours of manual labor crushing, grinding, chopping, and stirring materials that are often hard as stone when dried. Your forearms ache constantly from the effort. Your fingers develop deformities from the repetitive motions. No ergonomic tools. No occupational therapy. Just the slow breakdown of your body in service to your profession. Your remedies vary by social class as much as by disease. For wealthy patients, you incorporate expensive imported ingredients. Saffron from distant lands. Cloves and nutmeg from islands you'll never see. Ambergris collected from shorelines after storms. The rich expect their medicines to reflect their status, believing rarity equals efficacy, sometimes correctly, as certain imported plants do contain active compounds unknown in local flora. For the poor, your remedies use whatever can be gathered freely. Dandelion, plantain, nettles from roadside ditches and vacant lots. No insurance covers the difference. No sliding scale makes treatment more equitable. Just the harsh reality that effective medicine, such as it exists in your time, remains largely the province of those who can pay for it. When you treat the poor for reduced fees, or none at all, you do so from personal charity, not institutional support or government mandate. Your understanding of the human body comes from limited and often incorrect sources. No anatomy classes with cadaver dissection, no textbooks with detailed illustrations, just the occasional public dissection of executed criminals, events treated as both educational and entertainment. You've attended these when possible, standing on tiptoe in crowded town squares to glimpse the exposed organs, to hear lecturers explain theories of function that are more philosophical than biological. The internal geography you've constructed in your mind bears little resemblance to actual human anatomy. You believe the liver has 5 lobes corresponding to the 5 fingers of the hand, that the uterus has chambers that determine the sex of children, that the heart is the seat of courage rather than a pump for circulating blood. No cardiovascular understanding, no respiratory system, no endocrine glands or nervous pathways, just organs floating in a sea of humors, influenced by stars and spirits as much as by physical processes. Your surgical tools reflect this limited understanding. For bloodletting, you use a set of brass, cups, and a scarification blade, believing the location of cuts matters more than sterile technique. No alcohol swabs, no sterile gauze, just a flame passed quickly over metal to cleanse it in ways you don't understand. Attributing any benefit to spiritual purification rather than killing bacteria you don't know exist. For more involved procedures like lancing buboes or draining abscesses, you use knives of various sizes. Bone saws for amputations. Probes for exploring wounds. No surgical steel, no precision manufacturing. Just hand-forged implements that require constant maintenance to keep sharp and straight. You oil them with animal fat. Store them wrapped in leather. Sharpen them yourself on whetstones worn into curved depressions from years of use. The procedures you perform would be considered torture in modern times. No anesthesia beyond alcohol, opium for the wealthy, or a stick to bite down on for the poor. No painkillers, no sedatives, just the expectation that suffering is part of healing, that the screams of patients are a necessary accompaniment to medical intervention. You become partially deaf to these sounds over years of practice, not physically, but emotionally. A defense mechanism to allow you to continue your work. Amputation becomes increasingly common as the plague progresses, not because it helps with bubonic infection, but because the poor circulation and tissue damage of septicemic plague often leads to gangrene in extremities. No microsurgery, no reattachment possibilities, not even particularly good techniques for controlling bleeding or preventing infection. Just quick, brutal removal of dead or dying tissue. Cauterization with hot irons that sear flesh and fill rooms with the smell of burning meat. And survival rates so low that success seems miraculous rather than medical. Your relationship with other healers in town is complex. No medical board regulates practice. No consistent licensing ensures training or competence. Just a spectrum of practitioners ranging from university-educated physicians who rarely touch patients, to barber surgeons who handle bloodletting and minor procedures, to midwives with practical knowledge of herbs and women's health, to itinerant tooth pullers and bone setters who travel between towns offering specialized services. You occupy a middle position in this hierarchy, educated enough to command respect, practical enough to actually treat patients rather than just theorize about them. No professional organizations protect your interests. No unions negotiate working conditions. Just informal associations with colleagues, occasional letters exchanged, shared knowledge when plague brings multiple practitioners together in consultation over particularly difficult or high-profile cases. Competition exists between different types of healers, each defending their territory, their methods, their patient base. No referral systems, no insurance networks, just word of mouth and reputation determining who prospers and who struggles. The plague temporarily suspends some of these rivalries as the sheer number of sick overwhelms all practitioners. But old tensions remain beneath the surface, ready to re-emerge when the crisis eventually passes. Religious healers present both competition and collaboration. Monastery hospitals offer care based on charity rather than payment, focusing on comfort rather than cure, on spiritual health as much as physical recovery. No separation of church and state, no division between religion and medicine, just overlapping systems that sometimes work together and sometimes conflict, with priests offering last rites alongside your medical treatments, with prayers, said over remedies to enhance their effectiveness. Your relationship with patients is paternalistic by modern standards. No informed consent, no patient autonomy, just your expertise applied as you see fit with minimal explanation. Those who come to you expect directions to be followed without question, treatments to be endured without complaint, your word to be taken as final in all medical matters. No patient advocacy groups, no second opinions sought without offense, no questioning of authority within the doctor-patient relationship. You know your patients differently than modern doctors know theirs. No privacy laws, no confidentiality concerns, just intimate knowledge of family histories, living conditions, personal habits, and community standing. In a small town during plague times, you've been inside almost every home, seen people at their most vulnerable. No secrets that would never be shared in normal interactions. No professional distance. No emotional boundaries. Just complete immersion in the community you serve. This closeness makes each death more painful, each family's suffering more immediate. No psychological support services, no grief counseling, no recognition of secondary trauma experienced by medical providers, just the quiet acknowledgement among doctors that certain cases haunt you, certain patients whose faces appear in dreams, certain failures that make you question your vocation or your worth. The physical demands of your practice take cumulative toll. No ergonomic considerations, no disability accommodations, just the expectation that you'll continue regardless of personal pain or limitation. Your back aches from bending over beds placed directly on floors. Your knees deteriorate from kneeling beside the sick. Your eyes strain from examining symptoms by inadequate light. No reading glasses. No back braces. No anti-inflammatory medications beyond willow bark tea that you prescribe for others, but rarely take yourself. Your hands show the most visible damage. No protective gloves. No hand sanitizer. Just repeated exposure to harsh cleaning substances, patients' bodily fluids, and the endless preparation of medicines that stain and scar your skin. Your fingernails are permanently discolored from herb preparations. The skin on your palms thickened and cracked from constant washing. Small burns and cuts never fully heal before new ones replace them. No hand cream, no manicures, just the functional deformation of the tools you use most. Your meals grow increasingly sparse as the plague progresses, as food supplies dwindle, as your own finances suffer from treating patients who cannot pay or who offer payment in goods you can't use or resell. No grocery stores with reliable inventory, no restaurant delivery, just whatever is available at the market on the days. You have time to visit, often leftover items no one else wanted, sometimes charity from grateful patients who remember you with a loaf of bread or a piece of cheese. Sleep becomes a luxury rather than a necessity. No clear boundaries between working hours and personal time. No weekends or holidays. Just the constant expectation of availability whenever someone knocks on your door. You learn to nap sitting up between patients, to function despite exhaustion, to make critical decisions through the fog of sleep deprivation. No caffeine to keep. You alert. No sleeping pills to ensure rest. When you have the chance, just the body's natural rhythms increasingly disrupted by the demands of your profession. Your clothing reflects your status and function rather than comfort or personal preference. No casual Fridays, no dress codes, separate from professional identity. Just the somber colors and specific cuts that identify you as a doctor. Dark wool that shows fewer stains. Multiple layers that can be removed if contaminated. Sturdy materials that withstand frequent washing and rough use. No fashion choices. No self-expression through appearance. Just the practical considerations of someone who works with the sick and dying every day. The economics of medieval medicine create constant stress. No regular salary, no benefits package, just payment for each service rendered, often negotiated according to the patient's means rather than a standardized fee schedule. You extend credit to longtime patients. Accept payment in installments or in goods rather than currency. Sometimes write off debts entirely when families lose breadwinners to plague. No bankruptcy protection. No government safety net. Just your own financial insecurity mirroring that of the community you serve. Your home doubles as your office and pharmacy. No separate professional space. No boundaries between work and personal life. Just rooms that serve multiple functions. As examining areas, medication preparation stations, record storage, and occasionally overnight accommodation for patients too sick to be moved elsewhere. No janitorial service. No receptionist. Just you cleaning blood from floors and changing linens between patients, juggling medical care with the maintenance of your workspace. Your library consists of a few precious volumes, hand-copied, and bound in leather, passed down from teachers or purchased at great expense from travelers and scholars. No internet database, no medical journals, just ancient texts by Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, and others whose theories have remained, largely unchanged for centuries. You make your own additions in the margins, correcting what experience has proven wrong, adding observations that might help future readers. No peer review, no publishing industry, just the slow, organic evolution of medical knowledge through individual notation and apprentice training. Your medical records suffer from the same limitations. No electronic health records, no standardized forms, just your personal journal recording cases you find interesting or instructive. Symptoms noted, treatments attempted, outcomes observed. No privacy protocols, no backup systems. Just pages that could be lost to fire or water damage or simple misplacement, taking years of observations with them. You write by candlelight after long days of patient care, fighting exhaustion to document particularly unusual cases or seemingly effective treatments, creating a legacy that might outlive you if fortune allows. The plague changes your town in ways visible through your daily rounds. No urban planning department, no public works projects, just the organic adaptation of spaces to accommodate mass death and altered population patterns. Houses stand empty after entire families die, sometimes repurposed as isolation wards for the newly infected, sometimes avoided entirely as potentially contaminated. No hazmat teams, no professional cleaning services, just abandonment, or fumigation with herbs and smoke that do little against the actual causes of disease. Streets become less crowded as the years of plague continue, not just from death but from the new habits of survivors. No social distancing guidelines, no public health campaigns, just the instinctive avoidance of crowds, of close contact, of physical expressions of greeting that once defined community, life. People no longer embrace or kiss cheeks upon meeting, no longer gather in large groups for celebrations or governance, no longer touch products in markets before purchasing. No scientific explanation for these changes, just the observed pattern that those who avoid others seem to survive longer. Religious practices transform in response to plague pressures. Church services continue, but with modifications. Holy water fonts emptied after too many share the same potentially contaminated liquid. Communion practices altered to reduce shared contact. Confessions heard at greater distances despite concerns about privacy. No theological framework for these practical adaptations. No separation of scientific and spiritual understandings. Just the pragmatic adjustments of institutions trying to maintain function while their members die around them. Funeral customs undergo the most dramatic changes. No time for traditional laying out periods. No space for individual burials, as cemetery grounds fill beyond capacity. No clergy sufficient to perform full rites for each deceased. Mass graves become commonplace. Bodies wrapped in shrouds rather than placed in coffins that require too much wood and too much craftsmanship to produce in required quantities. No morgue refrigeration, no embalming. Just the hasty interment of corpses that decompose too quickly in summer heat and attract animals if left exposed. The economic systems of the town transform as craftspeople die without training replacements, as trade routes close, as formerly common goods become luxuries. No economic stimulus packages, no unemployment insurance. Just the harsh reality of supply and demand operating in a population reduced by half within years. Survivors find themselves in an economy where their labor has new value, where previously inaccessible occupations open to those of lower birth, where women take on roles traditionally reserved for men who no longer exist in sufficient numbers. These economic shifts affect your medical practice directly. Herbs once considered common become rare as fewer people gather them, as knowledge of identification and preparation is lost with the deaths of experienced collectors. No agricultural supply chains, No commercial distribution networks, just the fragile connections between individual providers that break easily when key members die from plague. Your own social status shifts as well. No credentials that universally convey expertise. No standardized training that guarantees competence. Just your observed success or failure rates determining your standing in the community. As other doctors die or flee, your position elevates regardless of actual effectiveness, simply through survival and continued presence. No marketing campaigns, no advertising, just word of mouth creating reputation in a time when reputation often matters more than results. The psychological impact of serving as a plague doctor manifests in ways you don't have names for. No post-traumatic stress diagnosis, no compassion, fatigue concept, no burnout recognition, just the slow accumulation of horrors witnessed and failures experienced that change how you view the world and your place in it. You develop coping mechanisms without understanding their function. Dark humor shared with other medical practitioners, emotional detachment from patients with the worst prognoses, ritualistic behaviors that provide illusion of control in a situation defined by its unpredictability. Your faith, whether strong or weak before the plague, undergoes a transformation through years of witnessing suffering that seems random and undeserved. No crisis counseling, no theological discussions about suffering, just your personal reckoning with a God who allows such devastation, with a church whose explanations increasingly ring hollow against the daily evidence of your experience. Some doctors become more devout, finding comfort in belief that transcends earthly suffering. Others abandon faith entirely, unable to reconcile divine benevolence with the reality they witness. Most exist somewhere between, questioning but not rejecting spiritual frameworks that provide their only context for understanding the inexplicable. Your concept of medical ethics evolves through necessity rather than philosophical inquiry. No bioethics committees, no institutional review boards, just your own conscience determining what constitutes appropriate care when resources are limited and need is overwhelming. You develop triage systems without naming them as such, treating those most likely to survive when options are limited, allocating scarce medicines based on combinations of need, potential recovery, and social value in ways that would seem callous or biased by modern standards, but represent your best attempt at fairness within impossible constraints. The knowledge you gain through plague years creates subtle shifts in medical understanding that will take centuries to fully manifest. You notice patterns without recognizing their significance. Observe connections without the conceptual framework to explain them. No germ theory, no microscopes revealing bacterial causes, just the accumulated observations that certain behaviors and conditions seem associated with increased or decreased risk. You notice that plague rarely strikes the same person twice if they survive the first infection, not understanding immunity but recognizing the pattern. No vaccinology, no antibody concept, just the pragmatic observation that leads you to recruit survivors specifically for nursing the newly infected, inadvertently creating a more resistant, caregiving workforce through trial and error rather than immunological understanding. You observe that homes with fewer occupants seem to have lower infection rates. Not understanding population density effects on disease transmission, but noting the correlation. No epidemiology, no R-naught values, just the practical recommendation that families spread out when possible, that the healthy separate themselves from the sick within households when space allows. You recognize that certain professions suffer higher mortality rates. Grain merchants, millers, warehouse workers, not connecting these patterns to the rats attracted to stored food, but noting the association. No vector theory, no understanding of flea transmission, just the observed reality that leads to practical warnings about occupational hazards without explanatory mechanisms. These observations accumulate in your records, in conversations with other practitioners, in the modified practices that evolve through plague years without theoretical foundation. No scientific method guides these adaptations. No hypothesis testing or controlled studies. Just the desperate pragmatism of trying everything and remembering what seems to help. Creating a foundation of observed phenomena that later generations will explain with mechanisms beyond your imagining. The plague years alter your perception of time itself. No clear demarcation between before and after. No distinct phases of outbreak and resolution. Just the relentless progression of seasons marked by varying intensities of death. Summer brings higher transmission rates as fleas breed more rapidly in warm weather. Winter offers brief respites as cold temperatures slow but don't stop the spread. Spring and autumn serve as transitions between hope and despair. As case numbers rise and fall without explanation you can comprehend. Years blend together in memory, distinguished only by particularly notable cases or personal milestones. No calendar reminders, no anniversary recognitions, just the continuous flow of patients seeking help, of bodies requiring attention, of remedies needing preparation. The plague becomes not an event, but a condition, not an interruption of normal life, but a new definition of normality that extends until you can barely remember what came before. Your identity merges with your profession until there is no separation. No work-life balance, no off-duty hours, no alternative activities that define you beyond your role as healer. You are the doctor, day and night, in sickness and health, in success and failure. No retirement planning, no career changes, just the expectation that you will continue until death or incapacity removes you from service. The tools of your trade become extensions of yourself. So familiar you use them without conscious thought. Your plague mask with its glass eyes and herb-filled beak, your leather bag worn smooth from years of handling, your reference books with pages turned so often they open automatically to commonly consulted passages. No technology upgrades, no new product lines, just the same implements year after. Year, maintained, repaired, replaced when necessary with near-identical versions. Your hands develop muscle memory for procedures performed thousands of times, measuring powders without scales, mixing tinctures to consistent potency without standardized recipes, finding veins for bloodletting without anatomical guides. No continuing education requirements, no skills recertification, just the constant repetition that creates expertise through experience rather than instruction. Your appearance ages faster than your years would suggest. No skincare regimes, no nutritional supplements, no preventive health care, just the accelerated deterioration that comes from stress, inadequate rest, and constant exposure to disease. Your hair grays prematurely. Your skin develops deep creases from repeated expressions of concentration and concern. Your posture reflects years of bending over sickbeds placed on floors rather than raised to comfortable heights. Other doctors in neighboring towns experience similar transformations, creating an unspoken brotherhood recognized through physical markers as much as professional knowledge. You know fellow plague doctors by their hands, by their eyes, by the characteristic stoop of shoulders that have carried too much weight for too many years. No professional conferences bring you together. No formal associations connect. You, just the silent recognition when your paths cross in travels between communities or consultations on difficult cases. Your vocabulary expands to include terms specific to plague treatment, words that would be meaningless to those outside the medical profession or from times before the outbreak. You develop shorthand descriptions for particular presentations of symptoms, for stages of disease progression, for types of buboes, and their likely outcomes. No standardized medical terminology, No international classification of diseases, just the organic evolution of language to describe the previously indescribable. Your senses adapt to your profession as well. You develop the ability to identify infections by smell before visible symptoms appear, to distinguish between types of fever through touch, to recognize the sound of pneumonic plague's characteristic cough from streets away. No diagnostic technology, no laboratory tests, just the heightened awareness that comes from years of observation and pattern recognition. Your memories of pre-plague life fade with each passing year, replaced by the constant present of medical service and the accumulated experiences of the pandemic. No photo albums preserve happier times. No videos capture moments you might want to revisit. Just the unreliable human recall that increasingly edits the past to make it either better or worse than it actually was, creating nostalgia or nightmare rather than accurate history. The plague's social legacy becomes apparent gradually as years pass. No census documents the demographic changes. No economic analyses quantify the shifts in labor markets and property ownership. Just the visible transformations in how the surviving community functions. Labor shortages create opportunities. For those previously restricted by class or gender, property consolidates in fewer hands as survivors inherit from multiple deceased relatives. Power structures reconfigure as traditional authorities die and new leaders emerge from unexpected quarters. Your own social position reflects these broader changes. No formal recognition marks your service. No medals commemorate your sacrifice. Just the altered relationship between you and the community you've served through its darkest hours. Survivors remember who continued providing care when others fled, who remained available regardless of ability to pay, who witnessed their suffering and did what little was possible to ease it. This remembrance translates to practical advantages in the post-plague economy. No retirement plan awaits. No pension pays your expenses in old age. Just the community support that manifests as food left at your door, as repairs made to your home without request or charge, as care provided to you when your own health finally fails. The reciprocity isn't organized or mandated, just the organic response of a society that remembers its debts. Your medical knowledge represents both the limitations of medieval understanding and the pragmatic adaptations forced by crisis. No textbooks capture your learning. No journals publish your observations. Just the direct transmission to apprentices who work alongside you, watching, assisting, absorbing, both the explicit instructions and the tacit knowledge that can't be verbalized. These apprentices carry your legacy into the future, some maintaining traditional practices unchanged, others incorporating modifications based on their own experiences. A few perhaps making connections that move medicine incrementally forward. No rapid paradigm shifts. No scientific revolutions. Just the slow evolution of knowledge through generations of practitioners responding to the demands of their time with the tools and concepts available to them. The plague eventually recedes not through medical intervention, but through natural processes you don't understand. No vaccines eradicate it. No antibiotics cure it. Just the combination of human immune responses in survivors, mutations in the bacteria itself, changes in rat populations and flea dynamics, alterations in human behavior and living arrangements, all operating below the threshold of medieval perception, but collectively changing disease patterns over decades rather than years. You continue practicing medicine as the crisis subsides, treating the everyday illnesses and injuries that seemed almost incidental during plague years but return to prominence as existential threats diminish. No dramatic transition marks this shift. No declaration of victory. Just the gradual realization that weeks have passed without new plague cases, that the disease has become endemic rather than epidemic, that life has achieved a new normal. that includes periodic outbreaks but not constant crisis. Your plague doctor attire gathers dust as years pass without requiring its use. The beaked mask with its glass eyes, the waxed coat reaching to your ankles, the gloves and rod that kept distance between you and the infected. No display case preserves these artifacts. No museum collects them as historical items. Just the practical storage in trunks or chests, available if needed again, but gradually becoming relics of a time you'd rather forget. The medical procedures you perform evolve as well, not through scientific breakthrough, but through the practical experience of what seemed to help during plague years versus what clearly didn't. No controlled studies guide these changes. No peer review validates them. Just your own observations and those shared by colleagues who survived. Creating a modified practice that incorporates lessons learned without understanding the underlying mechanisms. You rely less on bloodletting than before the plague. Having observed that patients already weakened by disease often declined faster after the procedure. No physiological understanding explains this shift. No concept of blood volume or oxygen transport, just the empirical recognition that certain traditional practices seem to harm more than help in specific circumstances. You place greater emphasis on cleanliness than pre-plague practices required, insisting on washed hands before treating patients, on boiled instruments for surgical procedures, on changed linens between the sick. No germ theory explains these precautions. No understanding of bacteria or sterilization. Just the observed pattern that practitioners who maintained these standards survived longer than those who didn't. Your pharmacopoeia shifts toward remedies that provided symptomatic relief during plague years rather than those that claimed to treat underlying causes but showed no visible effect. No pharmacology guides these choices. No understanding of active compounds or mechanisms of action. Just the pragmatic selection of treatments that at least made patients more comfortable even when cure remained impossible. These modifications to traditional practice happen without fanfare or formal recognition. Just the quiet evolution of medicine through crisis and response, through failure and adaptation, through the relentless process of trying everything and remembering what helped. No textbooks codify these changes. No governing bodies mandate them. Just the practical wisdom passed from one generation of healers to the next. Your own body bears witness to the plague years in ways visible and invisible. The visible marks include scars from accidental cuts during hasty procedures, joint deformities from years of repetitive motions, posture permanently altered by bending over sickbeds. No corrective surgeries repair these damages. No physical therapy restores function. Just the accumulated wear that identifies you as surely as any professional credential. The invisible impacts run deeper, traumatic memories that surface in dreams, psychological adaptations that served during crisis but complicate ordinary interactions in peacetime, spiritual questions that remain unresolved despite years of wrestling with them. No therapy addresses these wounds. No diagnoses. Name them. Just the private burden carried by those who stood between death and the dying for years without respite. As you age, younger doctors emerge with training different from yours. Some learned during plague years with its pragmatic adaptations. Others trained after in traditions that revert to pre-plague theories without incorporating crisis-learned modifications. No standardized curriculum ensures consistency. No licensing requirements mandate specific knowledge. Just the organic variation of medical education based on when and with whom each practitioner trained. You view these younger doctors with a mixture of hope and skepticism, recognizing their energy and fresh perspectives while doubting whether theoretical knowledge alone prepares them for the realities of practice. No formal mentoring programs facilitate knowledge transfer. No structured relationships ensure cross-generational learning. just the informal interactions that may or may not transmit the most valuable lessons from your experience. Your own practice gradually reduces as physical limitations increase, as younger practitioners take on more patients, as your reputation shifts from active healer to elder consultant called for particularly difficult cases or unusual presentations. No formal retirement process marks this transition. No ceremony acknowledges your service, just the gradual redistribution of responsibilities that reflects your changing capabilities. The medical knowledge you accumulated over decades exists primarily in your memory, in the journals you kept, in the apprentices you trained who now practice independently. No institutional repository preserves this wisdom. No academic archive ensures its survival. Just the fragile human systems of memory and relationship that may or may not carry your contributions forward into future generations. The town you served rebuilds gradually in the decades following plague's worst years, never quite returning to its former population but establishing new patterns of life and commerce adapted to post-pandemic realities. No urban renewal projects guide this reconstruction. No government planning commissions establish priorities, just the organic process of survivors reclaiming spaces, repurposing buildings, creating new connections where old ones were severed by death. Your place in this reconstructed community reflects both your professional role during crisis and your personal connections to families you attended through their darkest hours. No formal recognition commemorates your service. No official position acknowledges your expertise. Just the quiet respect manifested in greetings on streets, in seeds and produce left at your door, in young people directed to your home for advice or training in medical arts. In your final years, you watch the next generation respond to their own medical challenges, outbreaks of other diseases, surgical needs beyond your training, births and deaths that follow patterns familiar from decades of observation. No formal closure marks the end of your medical service. No retirement ceremony acknowledges your contributions, just the gradual transition from practitioner to observer, from active participant to living memory of times the young can hardly imagine. And when your own health fails, as it must, you face death with the perspective of someone who has witnessed it countless times, who knows its approaches and variations from decades of professional observation. No fear of the unknown shapes your experience. No mysteries remain about the physical processes of dying, just the acceptance that comes from intimate familiarity with life's final transition. The remedies applied to your ailments are the same ones you prescribed for others, prepared perhaps by hands you trained, administered in the home where you treated thousands. No hospital room surrounds you. No monitoring equipment tracks your vital signs. Just the simple space where you lived and worked, the tools of your profession now turned to your own care. Those who attend you in final illness include former patients, apprentices now practicing independently, neighbors whose families you treated through generations. No professional hospice. Workers manage your symptoms. No specialists consult on your case. Just the community you served now serving you through its collective memory and obligation. Your medical tools and texts pass to those you designated as most worthy, most capable of using them properly, most likely to carry forward the knowledge you accumulated through decades of practice. No estate sale disperses these professional items. No auction treats them as curiosities. Just the deliberate transmission to the next generation of healers who will face their own challenges with tools both physical and intellectual that you helped refine. The legacy you leave exists not in monuments or named institutions, but in the modified practices that became standard during your lifetime, in the observations recorded in journals that may influence future practitioners, in the chain of knowledge passed from teacher to student across generations. No medical breakthroughs bear your name. No fundamental discoveries redirect the course of healing arts, just the incremental improvements that collectively move medicine forward through centuries of trial, error, and adaptation. And so your story as a medieval plague doctor concludes not with dramatic revelation or revolutionary change, but with the quiet continuation of human efforts to understand suffering, to ease pain, to confront death with whatever tools and knowledge each generation possesses. The plague that defined your professional life becomes history, then legend, then distant memory preserved in texts read by scholars who cannot imagine the reality you lived. Sleep now, knowing that centuries later, others will look back at your struggle with a mixture of horror and gratitude. Horror at the conditions, at the limited tools, at the incorrect theories that guided your hand. Gratitude that you tried anyway, that you didn't surrender to hopelessness, that you kept the flame of healing alive, however dim, however flickering, until others could take it up and carry it forward into a future you'll never see, with medical miracles you couldn't imagine, with knowledge that would seem like sorcery to your medieval mind. Sleep, and dream of that future world where medicine has answers. But first, there is more to understand about your life, your daily struggles, your moments of doubt and rare victories. The seasons dictated much of your practice as a plague doctor. Each brought its own patterns of disease, its own challenges and rhythms. Spring carried hope and dread in equal measure. No weather forecasts warned of coming conditions. No seasonal predictions guided preparation, just the gradual warming that historically coincided with increased disease transmission. You watched the first flowers bloom with apprehension rather than joy, knowing that milder temperatures would soon bring more cases, more deaths, more impossible choices. Summer months were worst for plague transmission, though you didn't understand why. No knowledge of flea life cycles, no understanding of how warmer temperatures accelerated their breeding and feeding patterns. Just the observed reality that cases multiplied as temperatures rose. The heat complicated your work in other ways too. No refrigeration preserved medicines. No air conditioning made sick rooms bearable. Just the relentless warmth that accelerated decomposition and intensified the smells of disease and death that permeated affected homes. You worked through summer heat, wearing layers of protective garments that modern doctors would find unbearable. Your waxed coat reaching to your ankles. Your leather gloves despite temperatures that made your palms sweat inside them. Your beaked mask restricting breathing already labored in the heat. No moisture-wicking fabrics, no cooling technologies. Just wool and leather and linen soaked through with perspiration by midday. Dried stiff with salt by evening, never truly clean despite regular washing. Autumn brought brief respite. Cooler temperatures slowing transmission patterns without explanations you could comprehend. No understanding of how weather affected the complex interplay of bacteria, fleas, rats, and humans. Just the observed pattern that cases often declined as leaves turned color and fell. You used these months to replenish supplies, to visit patients with chronic conditions neglected during summer crisis, to train apprentices while the immediate pressure of epidemic peaks temporarily subsided. Winter created different challenges. No central heating made examining patients difficult in cold that numbed fingers. That made people reluctant to undress for proper examination. That froze medicines and required them to be warmed before administration. You treated as many cases of frostbite and hypothermia as plague during the coldest months, especially among the poor whose homes lacked adequate fuel, whose bodies were already weakened by malnutrition and previous illness. No thermal imaging identified tissue damage. No specialized treatments reperfused frozen extremities. Just gradual warming and observation. Amputation when tissue proved unsalvageable. Your understanding of seasonal disease patterns came from observation rather than theory. You noticed that certain illnesses appeared regularly with particular weather conditions or times of year, not understanding microbial dormancy cycles or transmission variables. Just the empirical recognition that coughs spread in winter when people gathered indoors, that digestive complaints increased in summer when food spoiled quickly, that plague itself seemed to follow annual cycles that rose and fell with temperature. These observations influenced your preventative recommendations. You advised patients to adjust their diets seasonally, to eat cooling foods in summer and warming ones in winter, not understanding nutritional content, but recognizing that certain items seemed better tolerated in different conditions. No vitamin supplements corrected seasonal deficiencies, no understanding of immune system fluctuations. Just practical advice based on generations of observed patterns. Your own physical health reflected these seasonal challenges. Winter exacerbated joint pain from years of kneeling beside low beds, of walking miles daily between patients, of repetitive motions preparing medicines. No orthopedic interventions relieved this suffering. No anti-inflammatory medications reduced swelling. Just herbal poultices you prepared for others and occasionally applied to yourself. Warm compresses that provided temporary relief at best. Summer brought different physical challenges: dehydration from working in heavy garments, skin irritations from constant sweating in wool and leather, exhaustion from the combination of heat and non-stop activity. No electrolyte drinks replenished lost minerals. No specialized cooling. Garments regulated body temperature. Just whatever watered wine or small beer was available for drinking. Whatever moments of rest could be stolen between patients. Your annual calendar included festivals and religious observances that continued despite plague, sometimes modified by necessity, but maintaining the structure that oriented medieval life around seasons and saints' days. No separation of these cultural practices from medical understanding. No conflict perceived between gathering for spiritual purposes and disease transmission. Just the integration of healing arts within broader cultural frameworks that provided meaning and context for suffering. You observed how different illnesses affected different populations, not understanding socioeconomic factors or exposure variables. Just the patterns visible through years of practice. Children suffered most from measles and smallpox. Young adults from accident and violence. The elderly from respiratory ailments and declining strength. No demographic studies quantified these differences. No epidemiology identified risk factors. Just the accumulated observations that influenced how you approached patients of different ages and circumstances. Plague itself showed patterns you recognized without explaining. The wealthy died at lower rates than the poor, not because of divine favor as some suggested, but because they lived in larger homes with less crowding, ate better diets that supported stronger immune responses, could afford to flee to country properties away from urban infection centers. No socioeconomic analysis documented these disparities. No health equity concepts addressed them. Just the observed reality that influenced your prognosis depending on a patient's social station. Your treatments varied accordingly. For the wealthy, you might recommend temporary relocation if plague appeared nearby, knowing they had options unavailable to most. For the poor, you focused on what might be done within crowded conditions, separating the sick from healthy. When possible, improving ventilation in small spaces, using vinegar and herbs to counter the smells believed to carry disease. No standardized care protocols ensured consistent treatment regardless of status. No ethical frameworks mandated equality. Just the practical adaptations to different resources available at different social levels. Class differences affected payment as well. From wealthy patients, you expected coins, sometimes substantial amounts for serious interventions or ongoing care. From the middle classes, payment might come as trade goods or services. A carpenter might repair your home. A baker provide bread for months. A blacksmith maintain your tools. From the poor, you often accepted whatever they could offer. Eggs from their few chickens, labor when they recovered. Sometimes nothing beyond their gratitude. No sliding scale formalized these arrangements. No financial aid program supplemented your income. Just the flexible expectations that allowed you to serve the entire community rather than only those who could pay in currency. Your relationship with the town authorities evolved throughout plague years. Initially, they sought your expertise, your predictions, your recommendations for community response. No emergency management systems guided these interactions. No incident command structures clarified responsibilities. Just the informal consultation between medical knowledge and governing power that established quarantines, regulated funerals, organized whatever public health measures medieval understanding could devise. As the plague continued and your recommendations proved unable to stop its spread, this relationship sometimes strained. No recognition of the limitations inherent in medieval medicine. No understanding that failure reflected the state of knowledge rather than personal incompetence. Just the human tendency to blame messengers for bad news and experts for unsolvable problems. You learned to moderate your warnings, to emphasize what might help rather than what couldn't be changed, to operate within political realities, while maintaining medical integrity. Your standing in the community reflected this complex position. Respected for your knowledge, yet sometimes feared for your association with death. Sought after for your skills, yet occasionally suspected of spreading the very diseases you fought. No public relations team managed this image. No media training prepared you for communicating difficult information. Just your own developing sense of what information helped versus what created panic, of when to speak boldly and when to remain silent. Religious authorities presented another complex, relationship. Church explanations for plague often contradicted your empirical observations, attributing to divine punishment what you observed following physical patterns independent of virtue or sin. No formal separation of church and medicine created clear boundaries. No established precedent determined whose explanation prevailed when they differed. Just the careful negotiation of potentially conflicting authorities that characterized medieval professional relationships. You developed diplomatic skills alongside medical ones, learning to frame your treatments in language that accommodated religious understanding, to incorporate prayers and blessings that satisfied spiritual authorities while you also applied whatever physical interventions seemed potentially helpful. No conflict between science and religion as modern people might perceive. Just the integrated worldview that sought to address body and soul simultaneously through complementary rather than competing approaches. Your daily routines acquired almost ritualistic quality as plague years continued, not from religious significance but from the psychological comfort of familiar patterns in unpredictable circumstances. You rose at the same hour regardless of season, prepared your protective garments in the same order, organized your medical bag with identical arrangement of tools and remedies, checked your supply of commonly used herbs before leaving home. No cognitive behavioral therapy identified these as coping mechanisms. No psychological understanding explained their importance to maintaining function under stress. Just the unconscious development of controllable patterns in a situation where so much remained beyond your influence. Small personal rituals marked transitions between patients, between entering infected spaces and returning to your own home. You might wash hands in vinegar, change outer garments, speak certain words or prayers believed to provide protection. No understanding of contamination vectors made these truly effective. No germ theory guided which precautions actually mattered. Just the psychological comfort of believing you'd done everything possible to protect yourself and prevent carrying disease between households. Your mental divisions of the town evolved as plague persisted. No official quarantine zones existed. On municipal maps, no color-coded systems identified risk levels, just your internal geography of which streets had active cases, which homes had been cleared after deaths, which areas seemed temporarily spared and might remain so if contact with infected districts could be limited. You planned your daily routes accordingly, sometimes advising patients to postpone non-urgent consultations if it meant traveling through high-risk areas, subtly managing community movements without modern understanding of disease containment. Your interactions with individual patients developed patterns based on plague stage and symptom presentation. For those with earliest signs, the fatigue and fever before characteristic buboes appeared. You might still offer hope alongside treatments, suggesting possibility of milder expression or even recovery. No actual effective interventions supported this optimism. No statistics showed significant survival rates, just the human instinct to provide comfort through hope when physical remedies failed. For patients with fully developed symptoms, the swollen lymph nodes and advancing systemic infection, your approach shifted toward palliation and preparation. No hospice protocols guided end-of-life care, no standardized comfort measures, just your accumulated experience of what eased suffering when cure became impossible. You might recommend positioning that made breathing easier, cool cloths for fever, whatever pain management medieval pharmacology offered through opium preparations or alcohol, while simultaneously suggesting family members make their peace and say what needed saying while the patient remained conscious. For families after death occurred, you advised on practical matters of body handling and burial alongside whatever emotional support you could provide. No grief counselors offered specialized assistance. No bereavement groups provided community support. Just your presence as someone familiar with death who could guide survivors through immediate necessities, while acknowledging their loss. You recommended swift burial, minimal contact with the corpse, burning of bedding and clothes, not understanding bacterial persistence, but observing that such practices seem to reduce subsequent infections in the same household. The psychological burden of these interactions accumulated over years of practice. No terminology identified the compassion fatigue you experienced, the secondary trauma from constant exposure to suffering, the moral injury from inability to save those who trusted your care, just the gradual numbing that allowed continued function, the emotional distance that developed between you and patients as self-protection rather than callousness, the compartmentalization that separated professional response from personal feeling. Your private moments reflected this burden in ways you might not acknowledge publicly. Perhaps tears shed in solitude after particularly difficult deaths. Perhaps anger expressed only to empty rooms. Perhaps questions directed to God or fate or the indifferent universe about the purpose of suffering so resistant to human intervention. No therapy addressed these natural responses. No validation recognized their inevitability. Just the expectation that doctors continued regardless of personal cost. Sleep became both necessity and enemy. Necessary for continued function, yet haunted by images from waking hours, by faces of those you couldn't save, by symptoms you recognized too late, or treatments that proved useless despite theoretical promise. No sleep aids reliably produced. Rest without dreams. No distinction between nightmares and memories when both contain the same scenes of suffering. Just the relentless cycle of exhaustion, disturbed sleep, and continued service regardless of personal recovery. Your understanding of plague itself evolved through years of observation. You recognized different presentations of the same underlying disease, the bubonic form with its characteristic swollen lymph nodes, the pneumonic form that spread directly between humans through coughing, The septicemic form that killed so quickly patients sometimes died before treatment could begin. No microscope revealed the common bacterial cause, no laboratory tests confirmed diagnoses, just the pattern recognition that connected seemingly different conditions through careful observation of progression and outcomes. You noticed that certain patients seemed naturally resistant, surviving exposures that killed others in the same household. No understanding of genetic factors or immune system variations. No concept of inherited resistance. Just the observed phenomenon that led to practical adaptations like recruiting survivors specifically as caregivers for new cases. An accidentally effective strategy based on empirical observation rather than theoretical understanding. Your treatments evolved as well, moving gradually from traditional approaches derived from ancient texts toward modifications based on your own experience of what helped or at least didn't harm. No clinical trials guided these adaptations. No peer review validated changes. Just the pragmatic adjustments of a practitioner who preferred observed results over inherited theory when they conflicted. You learned to recognize which cases might survive with intervention and which were beyond help regardless of treatment. An essential skill when resources remained limited and demands exceeded capacity. No formal triage protocols guided these assessments. No scoring systems quantified survival probability. Just the accumulated experience that allowed rapid evaluation based on symptom presentation, progression speed, age, and underlying health. Status. This ability to predict outcomes gave your words weight beyond their medical accuracy. When you told families a patient might recover, they believed because your predictions of death had proven so reliable. No understanding of statistical probability informed these assessments. No calculation of confidence intervals. Just the pattern recognition that comes from seeing hundreds of cases progress from initial symptoms through recovery or death. Your reputation spread beyond your town as plague continued, bringing consultations from neighboring communities. Requests for your presence when local practitioners faced unusual presentations or prominent patients. No telecommunications facilitated these exchanges. No conference calls or video consultations. Just messengers traveling dusty roads with written descriptions or verbal requests. Sometimes returning with you if the case warranted personal attendance. Sometimes carrying back your recommendations based on limited second-hand information. These consultations connected you to a wider network of plague doctors, creating informal channels for sharing observations and adaptations despite geographical separation and communication limitations. No medical journals published findings. No professional conferences gathered practitioners. Just the slow exchange of information through correspondence and conversation. Through traveling healers who carried knowledge between communities, alongside their medical bags. Through these exchanges, you learned of treatments attempted elsewhere, of outcomes observed by colleagues in distant towns, of patterns recognized across geographical boundaries that suggested common factors in disease spread and expression. No epidemiological mapping visualized these connections. No statistical analysis confirmed correlations. Just the accumulated anecdotes that collectively moved medical understanding forward through shared experience. You heard of preventative measures attempted in larger cities. The isolation of infected individuals on islands or dedicated pest houses. The burning of possessions from plague victims. The blocking of travelers from affected regions. No understanding of which interventions actually worked. No controlled comparisons of outcomes. Just the desperate attempts to control something that seemed beyond human management, to assert agency in the face of overwhelming mortality. Your own preventative recommendations incorporated elements that seemed effective in reports from elsewhere, modified for local conditions and resources. No standardization ensured consistent application. No regulatory bodies evaluated efficacy. just the pragmatic borrowing and adaptation that characterized medieval knowledge transfer across all fields, including medicine. The plague affected different communities in patterns you recognized without fully understanding. Port cities typically suffered first and worst. Market towns followed. Isolated villages sometimes escaped entirely. No concept of global trade networks as disease vectors. No understanding of how ships carried infected rats between ports. Just the observed. Reality that influenced where you might recommend vulnerable patients relocate during outbreak peaks. Mountain communities often fared better than those in river valleys. Dry regions better than swampy ones. No understanding of how geography affected rat habitats or flea survival. No concept of vector ecology. Just the empirical observations that led to practical recommendations about where the wealthy might establish country retreats with lower plague risk. Your medical bag contained some items specifically associated with plague treatment. Tools and remedies rarely used for other conditions. Special knives for lancing buboes, cupping devices for drawing out poisoned blood from around swollen lymph nodes, herb combinations believed specifically effective against plague miasmas. No standardized equipment, no regulation of what constituted necessary tools. Just the practical collection assembled through experience and adapted to observed needs. The contents of this bag revealed your particular approach to plague treatment, your balance between traditional and innovative methods, your emphasis on certain aspects of care over others. Some doctors carried more surgical implements, focusing on drainage procedures and physical interventions. Others emphasized herbal remedies and internal treatments. Still others specialized in preventative measures and advised primarily on avoiding exposure. No medical specialties formalized these differences. No certifications distinguished approaches. Just the organic development of individual practice styles based on training, experience, and personal inclination. Your own approach reflected your personality as much as your medical training. Perhaps you emphasized comfort measures when cure proved impossible. Perhaps you focused on supporting families through loss rather than prolonging inevitable death. Perhaps you specialized in identifying cases early enough for isolation to protect others. No professional development plans guided these specializations. No career counseling directed your practice. Just the natural evolution of focus based on what you found most effective or meaningful in your work. The tools you used most frequently showed were that told their own story of your practice. Handles smoothed by years of handling. Blades thinned from repeated sharpening. Containers darkened by the medicines they held. No planned obsolescence required regular replacement. No technological upgrades rendered equipment outdated. Just the gradual deterioration that paralleled your own physical aging. Both you and your tools wearing down together through years of constant use. Your knowledge of herbs constituted perhaps your most valuable medical resource. You knew which plants treated which symptoms, when to harvest each for maximum potency, how to prepare, preserve, and combine them for various effects. No pharmacology explained their chemical constituents. No understanding of active compounds or mechanisms of action. Just the empirical knowledge passed through generations of healers and augmented by your own observations. You recognized which plants reduced fever, willow bark, meadow sweet, which eased pain, opium poppy, henbane, which promoted sweating believed to expel toxins, elderflower yarrow, which supported healing of external wounds, calendula, comfrey. No clinical trials confirmed efficacy. No standardized dosing ensured consistency. Just the traditional knowledge that sometimes helped and sometimes didn't, for reasons you couldn't explain. For plague specifically, you relied on herbs believed to counter miasmas or strengthen the body against corruption. Angelica, valerian, and rue featured prominently in preventative recommendations. Garlic and onion in treatments for active cases. Artemisia and wormwood in preparations for fumigating sick rooms. No understanding of antibacterial properties that made some of these accidentally effective. No knowledge of immunostimulant effects, just the traditional associations and observed results that guided selection and application. Your preparation methods reflected both practical experience and symbolic considerations. Some herbs required drying, others used fresh. Some steeped in alcohol to extract properties, others boiled in water or infused in oils. No chemistry guided these choices. No understanding of solubility or molecular extraction. Just the accumulated knowledge of what seemed to work based on generations of trial and error. Symbolic elements influenced preparation as well. Harvesting certain plants during particular moon phases. Gathering some at dawn and others at sunset. Incorporating prayers or incantations during processing. No separation between practical and spiritual aspects of healing. No distinction between pharmacologically active components and ritually significant preparations. Just the integrated approach that characterized medieval medicine's blend of empirical observation and cultural meaning. The storage of your medicinal supplies occupied significant space in your home. Dried herbs hung in bundles from ceiling, beams. Powdered ingredients in labeled containers on shelves. Prepared medicines in bottles and jars arranged by purpose or potency. No refrigeration preserved perishable items. No climate control maintained optimal storage conditions. Just the careful placement in cooler, darker areas of your home. The regular rotation of stock as older preparations were used or discarded. The constant monitoring for spoilage or infestation. You prepared most medicines yourself rather than purchasing them completed. No pharmaceutical industry standardized preparation. No quality control ensured consistency. Just your own knowledge. And care determining whether treatments achieved desired effects. You knew which ingredients required careful measurement, which could vary without harm, which combinations might prove dangerous rather than beneficial. No toxicology studies guided these assessments. No reported adverse events warned of potential interactions. Just the cautious experimentation and observation that characterized pre-scientific medicine. Your attitude toward innovation reflected both openness to effective new approaches and skepticism of untested claims. You evaluated novel treatments, suggested by colleagues or traveling healers not against theoretical frameworks but against practical results observed in your own patients. No peer-reviewed evidence guided these assessments. No placebo-controlled studies. Just the pragmatic question of whether patients improved more, less, or the same with new methods compared to traditional ones. This practical orientation sometimes placed you at odds with more academically oriented physicians who prioritized theoretical consistency over observed outcomes. No formal distinction separated these approaches. No recognized division between research and clinical practice. Just the spectrum of individual practitioners ranging from those who trusted ancient texts implicitly to those who modified tradition based on experience. Your position on this spectrum shifted during plague years, moving gradually from deference to classical authorities toward greater reliance on personal observation. No paradigm shift marked this transition. No dramatic rejection of traditional frameworks. Just the incremental adjustments forced by circumstance, by the failure of established methods against unprecedented mortality, by the necessity of trying anything that might help when orthodox approaches clearly didn't. Your apprentices observed this evolution, some embracing your modifications, others maintaining more traditional approaches despite witnessing their limitations. No standardized curriculum ensured consistent training. No certification requirements mandated specific knowledge. Just The direct transmission from practitioner to student that might preserve innovations or revert to orthodoxy depending on individual inclination. The selection of these apprentices reflected both practical and personal considerations. You chose individuals who showed manual dexterity for surgical procedures, who demonstrated memory capacity for recalling complex herbal formulations, who exhibited the emotional stability necessary for facing constant death without becoming paralyzed by grief or fear. No aptitude tests measured these qualities. No personality assessments predicted success. Just your intuitive evaluation based on initial interactions and observation during preliminary training. You preferred certain qualities in potential students. Perhaps curiosity that led to questioning rather than simple memorization. Perhaps compassion that maintained humanity despite necessary emotional distancing. Perhaps stamina that sustained physical and psychological functioning through demands that broke others. No formal recognition identified these as essential physician characteristics. No professional standards required them. Just your personal understanding of what allowed continued effectiveness in conditions that defeated many practitioners. The training you provided combined demonstration, explanation, supervised practice, and gradually increasing independence. No textbook standardized content. No examinations measured progress. Just the organic development of capability assessed through daily observation and adjusted guidance. You determined when a student could perform simple procedures unsupervised, when they could prepare basic remedies without oversight, when they could be trusted with initial patient assessment or independent treatment of routine conditions. This training model preserved both the strengths and limitations of medieval medicine. Strengths included direct transmission of practical skills, immediate application of knowledge to actual cases, integration of technical procedures with professional identity and ethics. Limitations included perpetuation of incorrect theoretical frameworks, inconsistent incorporation of innovations, highly variable quality depending on individual teacher capability and commitment. Your own teaching reflected both what you received from your teacher and the modifications forced by plague experience. You emphasized certain aspects more heavily than your training had. Perhaps cleanliness protocols that seemed to reduce transmission. Perhaps pragmatic symptom management when cure proved impossible. Perhaps preventative measures that appeared more effective than treatments for active disease. No curriculum review evaluated these changes. No educational oversight ensured comprehensive coverage. Just your judgment of what proved most valuable in actual practice.